You're listening to Simple Health Radio, the podcast about recognizing medical emergencies and promoting wellness. Your host is Dr. Emron, an experienced ER physician who has treated thousands of people just like you. Information on the show is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Always talk to your doctor or go to the nearest emergency room with any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Simple Health Radio. Today's question of the day comes to us from Ricky, known as the Jolly Rancher Commander. He's the host and producer of Geek'd Up Radio. He has a very interesting podcast that talks about a lot of the recent movies and other pop culture topics. You can listen to his show on geekdupradio.podbean.com. He sent in a question about a problem he's been having with his foot. Let's take a listen.
This is Ricky, the Jolly Rancher Commander from Geek'd Up Radio, and I have my own health question. And I was wondering, what is the best way to treat dry, cracked skin on the heel of your foot that won't go away? Thank you.
First off, let me thank Ricky for taking the time to record a question and sending it in to us. When we talk about foot rashes, there's actually a lot of different causes. Feet are naturally exposed to a large amount of chemicals, debris, liquids, infections, and irritation. As a medical doctor, I always ask certain questions to get a better history. The questions that I would ask in this case could include some of the following. When did you first notice the rash? What color was the rash when it first started? What color is the rash now? Were there any blisters? Was there thickened skin? Was there a smell or odor? Was there ever any bleeding? And is it painful? The answers to these questions will help me to rule in or rule out some of the common causes. After that, I would ask about treatments that were tried and whether any of them were successful. Now, I don't have a photo of this particular foot rash, but what I can do is talk about some of the common conditions that I see every day and some of the possibilities that may be affecting our listener today. Now, the most likely rash, based on the description that I got, is going to be athlete's foot. So the medical term for athlete's foot is called Tinea pedis. Tinea is just another name for a yeast infection or a fungal infection, and pedis means foot. Now, feet have a high risk of developing fungal infections because the foot is moist. It's exposed to floors. It's enclosed in shoes and socks, and sometimes it's just neglected in our day-to-day hygiene. Fungal infections grow very slowly, so it takes weeks or even months for them to actually appear. Common sources of fungal infections include the gym, work boots, swimming pools, or even just cleaning out the garage. Fungal infections generally are not painful. When someone is exposed, the roots of the fungus actually grow underneath the skin initially. So it can take several months for them to grow into a certain size and then pop up to the surface. Fungal infections usually are yellowish or whitish in color, and the sole of the foot is predominantly affected. Sometimes there's also a smell, and it can spread into the shoes or the socks. There are several over-the-counter medications that can be used to treat mild fungal infections, including athlete's foot. Some of the common names include Lamisil, tinactin, ketoconzale, and terbinafine. The dilemma is that most people don't use the creams long enough. So, for example, if it takes about 3 months for a fungal infection to develop before you notice it, it's going to take about 3 months of daily treatment for it to go away. It's not really the surface of the skin that I'm concerned about, it's really the deeper roots that are underneath. Because if you just go by the cosmetic outer appearance, the roots are still there and they will just regrow probably worse in a few weeks or a few months. Now, fungal infections that are untreated will start to infect the toenails and the fingernails. That is a very bad situation. Toenails and fingernail fungal infections require 1 year of treatment to fully resolve because it takes almost 1 year for a toenail to grow from the cuticle all the way to the edge. If those infections are not treated properly, people develop very thick, twisted, and discolored nails, and oftentimes they're very brittle. So sometimes they'll just fall off and they won't grow back, and that becomes a very sensitive cosmetic issue, especially if people are missing multiple toenails. And that's a sensitive issue for not just women, but also for men. So again, I started with the topic of fungal infections because I think that's the most likely cause of the current symptoms. The only way to know for sure is to see your family doctor or a foot doctor or a podiatrist so they can do some basic testing to confirm it and then start the treatment appropriately. Now, if the case is very severe, they're probably going to use a combination of prescription antifungal creams plus oral antifungal tablets. So basically, you're trying to kill the infection from the outside and the inside. This will improve the chances that the infection will go away quickly and that it doesn't spread to the opposite foot or even to other people in your house. Now, if there is a confirmed fungal infection, I do recommend that you spray the inside of your shoe every day with antifungal medication. You may just want to buy a brand new pair of shoes and throw out the old ones if that's an option. The socks you have are probably contaminated, so I would probably throw those out too. And I do recommend that you keep an extra pair of socks in your truck or your car or at work in your locker room and change out your socks multiple times a day. Again, moisture breeds fungal infections. If you have sweaty feet, you're going to get more fungal infections in the future. So the easiest way around that is to change out your socks multiple times a day, and that will reduce the moisture and keep your feet healthier. Now, there are antifungal powders also available. Basically, the powder is activated with sweat, and that helps to absorb the moisture and also to kill the fungal infection at the same time. The key, though, is diligence. You have to do this every single day, especially during the summer months, because oftentimes in the heat, when you go into the swimming pool, when you're working outdoors, when you go into the gym, that's when they are exposed to the fungus, but you may not notice it until the fall or even the winter. So that's why you have to be very cautious throughout the whole year. Now, there are a couple of other home remedies that may provide some relief.
Good evening, friends. This is Dave from the Sleepy Time Tales podcast, a podcast where if I do my job right, I've bored you to sleep by the end of the first episode. If this sounds like something that might be useful for you, search for Sleepy Time Tales on your podcast service of choice. It can definitely be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or pretty much anything I can think of. Otherwise, take a look at the website, sleepytimetales.net, and you'll find the links to everything relevant there. Thank you very much.
One of those involves mixing warm water in a small bucket or in your bathtub and adding Epsom salt. Soaking your feet in Epsom salt in warm water every night for about 15 minutes is very beneficial. It's an ancient remedy, but what it does is loosens up the dead skin, and it actually kills some infections at the surface as well. There's not really any side effects with Epsom salt, so it should not cause any burning or pain. Now, tea tree oil has also been studied. It's very popular now. You can find it at almost every grocery store. And there are some chemicals in the tea tree oil itself that are known to help moisturize the feet and actually help reduce the development of fungal infections. Again, the key, though, is you have to use them every single day. Another option is going to be to get a pedicure. This is not a medical diagnosis, but it is something that would be beneficial because those people are very attuned and they recognize a lot of problems with the feet immediately. So I do recommend a pedicure for men and women because they can remove some of the dead skin and advise you on some simple treatments that may help before you end up seeing your doctor. Now, let's say in this case, it's not a fungal infection. What are some of the other possibilities? Well, it could be a corn of the foot. A foot corn is a very small area with a lot of keratin. The medical term is hyperkeratosis. It'll basically bulge out from the skin and it becomes discolored. It shouldn't spread if it's in a localized area, but it can be painful because these are often over pressure points. So at the base of the toe or at the base of the heel, you may develop that. There are over-the-counter medications you can try. Many of them are made by Dr. Scholl's, and they have a small adhesive pad, something to just cushion the corn, and that allows it to protect it from the shoe or when you're walking. Now, calluses are going to be larger areas of thickened skin, and these have layers that build up onto themselves. It increases in size by the way you walk, by the way you stand, and even by the style of shoes that you wear. So calluses themselves are not harmful, but again, when you get a pedicure, they can remove some of the calluses, but you may redevelop them just based on the way you walk, the work you do, and some of the shoes that you're wearing. So with careful hygiene, calluses should not get infected. Plantar warts are another problem, and plantar warts are actually caused by a virus. So these are not fungal infections, but they're actually a virus that will infect the foot, oftentimes the sole of the foot, either along the toes or the arch or the heel, and these will get larger over time. As they get bigger, they become more painful because when you're walking on them, the roots of the wart actually penetrate into the foot and it touches nerves. The problem with warts is they're highly contagious. So you can spread them from one foot to the other. You can spread them to your hands and even to your face. You don't want to be spreading these throughout your household with your family members. But think about it. If you're walking barefoot in your house, your bathrooms, your tiles, all those areas are contaminated. So there's a high risk of spreading them as well. There are some over-the-counter medications to help treat warts. Again, Dr. Scholl's has a whole variety of them. But oftentimes people come to the clinic and just get them frozen off. It's a much faster approach. Now, there's a couple of other conditions that are more systemic. So one would be eczema. Eczema is a type of atopic dermatitis. Basically, that means it's a very itchy rash and it becomes irritated. Oftentimes, it becomes irritated between the toes and it flares up due to asthma attacks or food allergies because this is systemic. There's some chemicals in the blood that react badly and it causes eczema to flare up. Now, the treatment for eczema is generally going to be moisturizers and steroid creams. Psoriasis is very similar to eczema. It's also an autoimmune disorder, but the rash will be silver in color, and it can increase in size. It can also be very painful. The rash of psoriasis is also linked with arthritis. So people who have any possibility of psoriasis need to see a rheumatologist. They need to get blood work done to test for other autoimmune conditions, and oftentimes they end up on steroids and other immunosuppressants. Now, let's say it's not a fungal infection and it's not a viral infection. What else could it be? Then we're talking about bacterial infections, and bacterial infections are never good. The most common one that people talk about is going to be a staph infection. Staph infections lead to boils or abscesses, causes ingrown toenails, fever, and a lot of pus. They are very painful. If these infections develop, people do need to see their doctor right away to get on antibiotics and possibly to drain that abscess to get rid of the staph infection. Now, feet are often neglected for different reasons, but it's important to keep a close watch to prevent complications. I always recommend people see their doctor or even a foot doctor at least once a year. They will also check you for diabetes, poor blood circulation, or any type of nerve issues. People who have any of those conditions are going to have a high risk of complications. We do know that diabetics, the number one risk factor with their feet is going to be infection, and the second biggest risk factor is going to be amputation. So we don't want people to lose their toes or their feet or their lower legs due to uncontrolled diabetes. So always talk with your doctor if you have any concerns about that. So let me thank again Ricky for sending in a great question about foot rashes. You can listen to his podcast called Geek'd Up Radio by visiting his website, geekdupradio.podbean.com, and I'll update our show notes with all of the information that we talked about today. It should have a lot of details that you can reference, and there'll be some additional links where you can look at the photographs and compare some of your own notes as well. If you have a question you want me to answer, just record it and send it to us. Be sure that you provide us with your email address by visiting our website, simplehealthradio.com. We have a lot of giveaways coming up and some special events, including a brand new monthly newsletter that's going to highlight some of our best episodes. So thank you again for spending time with me on today's episode. I hope you'll tune in again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Visit simplehealthradio.com to read the blog, follow links mentioned on this episode, and easily share content with your family and friends. Subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and the 3 and Out Radio Network. Be sure to connect with Dr. Amron on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and Tumblr to send us your questions and ideas.